What happens when you give a media personality and a sex therapist a podcast? You get Spill the Tea, a bold, unfiltered space where no topic is off limits, from sex and relationships to the messy, hilarious, and heartbreaking realities of life. Will Nash and Maria Orrego serve up real talk with expert insight, hot takes, and a whole lot of tea.
My best friend's wedding. Do you remember that? Do you remember my best friend's wedding?
Julia Roberts, Cameron Diaz. Yes.
Do you remember having that with like any of your friends? The idea of if we're 40 and single, we'll marry each other. Did you have that growing up?
I 100% had that with one of my close girlfriends back when we were like, I'd say early 20s. If we're not married by the time we're like 40 years old, let's do it. Let's just get married.
That's hilarious. I don't know. Have you ever heard of anybody actually going through with it though? Because I remember that. I remember doing it in high school and then probably in my 20s as well. If we're not married by the time we're 40, we'll marry each other. We're great friends. We can just be roommates. It'll be great. And then obviously the movie, My Best Friend's Wedding, Julia Roberts also had that deal. Have you ever heard of anyone actually going through with it?
In terms that it was an actual sort of agreement, no. Like, I feel like that's one of those things you say when you're in your 20s. And then even if you're not in a relationship or you're not married by the time you're in your 40s, you just kind of continue life on for the most part. I mean, maybe
You're just like, no, I never said that to you.
or you just kind of like, let's just kind of throw that in the pile and pretend that never happened, right? I don't know anyone personally that had that happen and went through with it in terms of, hey.
Yeah, I can't think of anyone either. I remember the people that I like, quote unquote, made those pacts with, right? And all of us were like, are all in happy relationships now, and I don't have to promise that there's anyone anymore. But
was it someone who, and maybe you didn't find this out until later, identified as gay, or would it have been someone who was straight who said that to you?
Oh, interesting. I will say my high school one, was a straight male that I was like really great friends with. And then in my 20s, yes, I do actually remember it being one of my friends that was really struggling with his sexuality for more like conservative purity reasons. He wasn't allowed to come out. And so he and I talked about it a lot, like at length, never that we would actually go through with it. But him wanting to like hide it from his family and like maybe needing to do that with some sort of friend that was in agreement of like hiding who he truly was, but also presenting in a certain way, which to me was just such a heartbreaking conversation to have, that he would have to consider that as part of his lifestyle.
Well, and it's interesting because these are things that do happen and do exist, whether or not we know people who are in a agreement with that, something that's been called a lavender marriage. Now, historically, from what I've read or from what I've researched on it, back in time, there was a lot of this happening because of societal norms, religion, politics, cultural upbringing, maybe some internalized homophobia. And I mean, we've talked about this on past podcasts before, where it's only really been the last couple of decades where things have started to open up and people have started to be a little more free and open and fluid when it comes to their own sexuality. I don't know if it's just my For You page on social media or my feed, but I do feel like I am seeing a lot more online now, and even in like the last year, about lavender marriages and couples living in these marriages, I think defined as a straight woman and as a gay man, and for maybe some of the above mentioned reasons, kind of having, you talk about contracts, having that agreement that this is what they are going to do, which, I mean, where do we start?
Gosh, I know it's so much to take in. I will say I've noticed it in like my career for a lot of the like boomer or X generation having this as part of their lifestyle. Like I've had a lot of boomers in my office talk about their lavender marriage because again, like they grew up in an era where this had to be secret, right? Their lifestyle wasn't allowed. They would have been shunned from their friend group, their family, their church, or even like their employer, right? So I've had a lot of clients like that where they've had to live that double life, unfortunately, where the one spouse is fully aware of the other person's sexuality and the other person is allowed to do what they need or want to do. And they have that wonderful agreement. And it did happen a lot, right? The 50s, the 60s,
Mhm.
70s, for sure. Like this was a huge thing that people would get into. There's tons of shows that show that as well. I know like Masters of Sex, which is a great
Mhm.
I know it's old now. I think I'm dating myself, but they also like had a lavender marriage on that TV program, which was amazing to see how difficult it was and still is. I will say though, like this new trend, like you're saying that it's coming up on your feed, it's coming up for me as well. I'm a little bit surprised and also worried that in 2025, we still think we have a need for lavender marriages. Like, I know some people are poking fun of them as like marrying your gay bestie, which I know you you hate that like term, but people are like poking fun of that, like how much fun that would be. But the fact that lavender marriages still have to exist today in 2025, to me is incredibly disturbing and heartbreaking.
I'd agree with you. I think that it's a situation, and there's also this other couple online. I forget their names right now. I believe they're in the US. They come up on my TikTok, and again, it's a straight woman. It is a gay man. They do a lot of content individually and then on their own. And a lot of times she's starting off I'd have to look them up. Like Samantha, I believe, is a girl. I cannot think of the guy's name right now. I don't know if you know who I'm referring to or not.
I don't
And
know.
and like a lot of her tagline, like right after she got married to him, it was like, "Oops, I married a gay man." And I've never saw them talk about like sexually what happens or like behind closed doors, but I guess they are connected and they are bonded by their connection, is how they describe it. And they love each other. It's very interesting. It's a very interesting concept because as a gay man, I would think that I kind of understand it from both sides, but I also understand it that I wouldn't want to personally live that life. Does that make sense?
Oh, for
Like,
sure.
because with the idea of ever making it happen, you go back to pre coming out, pre-identifying as gay. And you're like, okay, you know what? Those feelings, those emotions are so raw and so intense, and you're not sharing anything about your personal life with anyone or with very few people. So you can see maybe why you would want to enter that. But then you think about life after coming out, and you're like, I could not imagine being in a relationship, being married to a woman, knowing full well that I am gay. And then there's this other sort of stance of like, I would think that if you are in a lavender marriage and you kind of set these rules up for yourself, or you've allowed someone to set these rules up for you, I just don't understand how you would not feel fulfilled. And that's not just for the man, also for the woman. And I'm not even just talking about sex. I just think from a connection standpoint, right? I think that there would be so much strain on your relationship before you even start it. Like that, I don't know.
Yeah.
Is
There's
that
pressure.
wrong to say? I don't
No,
know.
I think there's a lot of pressure, right? I've had a lot of conversations actually with the spouses in lavender marriages, like the female, right? The woman that says like, "Yes, I will be your like wife in order to protect you from all of these things that are coming at you, whether they're political, family, church,
Mhm.
whatever it is." And they what I've gotten as kind of like a general consensus is that they actually live a very fulfilled life in the sense of like a really great partnership because there's an understanding and because there is that level of communication that exists of like this is a relationship for the contract, right? Again, we go back to that idea of like they're communicating what they both want and need, but it can also feel very lonely because you're not perhaps romantically connected to this person, right? You're getting maybe all the benefits of a great relationship, but the emotional connection might be very different. I've also had unfortunately spouses that have actually fallen in love with their other partner and wanted something more, right? that the other person's not able to share that emotion or that connection because they don't see the world the same way. So it can get very sad very quickly. And again, this idea of lavender marriages in old Hollywood, the stars having to do this, right? The celebrities having to put on a front and having to do this for their own like lifestyle. Politicians are very known to having lavender marriages as well in order to kind of put on that front and that personality. It becomes a mask. That's what it is, right?
Honestly, it makes me so sad in the sense that we're still in this climate for 2025 where whatever the reasoning is behind that, that someone would not be able to be with who they are attracted to or who they are drawn to based on what other people are thinking about them or how other people are going to judge them. And I say this again, I say this, I was a little bit older when I came out myself as gay. So I have to take myself back to those days when I wasn't out. But I remember before I was out and I was at weddings, I always had this thing, and this is like, obviously I knew how I was feeling on the inside, but I remember like looking at weddings and being like, okay, like I'm happy for my friends who got married or family members, whoever the wedding was. But almost I had this like uncomfortability about being at a wedding because I couldn't picture now, thankfully, in Canada, not everywhere in the world, but in Canada, you can legally get married as a gay person, as a lesbian, like and whatnot, right? Very thankful for that. However, it's like it feels like a very male, female, straight thing at times when you're at weddings,
Yes,
especially if it's
absolutely.
religious. Again, nothing wrong with that, but it can feel very male, female joining together. And I think that it always made me a little bit uneasy and thinking to myself, there was times where I was like, you know what? Like, I don't think I'd be able to go through with that at that point because I just wasn't out. So you think all of these things and you overthink every scenario before you come out to yourself, which not always healthy to do that. But so I couldn't imagine going through with it.
I agree.
But
Yeah, going through with the lavender marriage and actually putting yourself through that would be incredibly difficult. Again, though, going back to what you just said of the political climate and like what's happening in 2025, heartbreaking that people are considering this again for their own safety and for their own ability to kind of exist in this world and having to do that, right?
it's tough because I don't want anyone watching or listening to this podcast right now to think that I don't understand why you would be in a lavender marriage. I do understand why you would be or why you have to be based on background, based on situations within the family, based on a whole number of factors. It always will make me sad when someone at some point cannot fully embrace themselves and live life in their true authentic self. Like, and understanding that there can be various factors as to why you feel or you have to do it. But I just don't know that in that situation with the lavender marriage, you're putting what's important first, and that is you. And that is you. And then you go into this marriage, and I would assume you don't know, like any marriage, you don't know how it's going to go. And then you get into a marriage, a lavender marriage, and you're doing it almost for keep everybody else happy, but maybe you're hurting inside, maybe you're crying inside, maybe you're dying inside, maybe you're having those pit feelings in your stomach every day when you're waking up. And you probably do love this woman. It's in a different way, but you do love her. I don't know. It is this is a hard one.
It
This
is
is a hard one.
It's hard because you're also talking about this idea of like being empowered in your identity, being free, allowing yourself to be like truly yourself. But then there's the other side of it that sometimes in order for these people that feel this way or having to do lavender marriages, it's more so even just for survival sometimes, right? They have to do it because of their culture or their religion or their family ties or even now their political ties. Like
Yeah.
there's so much to this that might go beyond even identity, like sexual identity, and more so just I have to survive as a human in this world that right now is not very kind, right? There's so much hate out there. And I agree with you, though. There should be none of that. There should be the ability to just marry who you want to marry or don't marry who you like don't want to marry, right? But right now, unfortunately, we're not living in that reality, which again, those words coming out of my mouth seem insane to me that I'm saying that in 2025, that people would still be feeling or are feeling this right now, this fear of survival in their own skin and their own sexuality.
One thing I wonder too with the concept of sorry, not trans, with lavender marriages is, I think I said trans because when you're talking about the climate right now with politics, and that's actually something I would like to talk about in a future podcast is the trans community, since uh, I think it's important to shine the light on that. But that'll be
I
another
agree.
podcast
Yeah.
episode, right? There's a lot of issues happening within that beautiful community. Um, is when it comes to lavender marriages, and I'm sure you've probably had some inside that office right there, are most of them public, open, honest about the fact that it is a lavender marriage? Or is it a lavender marriage like in at home, and then outside of the house, they're just trying to fool the world that they are a happy heterosexual couple? Which way does it tend to go more so? Like, that's, I mean, and I'm asking you this like genuinely. I am curious.
Yeah, I would say in my professional experience of what I've experienced, it's mostly been at home we understand our arrangement, and in the world we present and we mask. So it is very performative. Like they do have to present to the family, to friends, because they also have to keep the lie visible, right? They have to keep it alive. And so things become secretive, right? So then you find both partners are engaging perhaps in other relationships, but they have to be more secretive about it, right? They have to engage in that in like different cities, or they have to do it at sex clubs and not like within their community. So I would say a lot of it unfortunately is performative outside of the households, because it has to be in order to keep that front alive. Very few people share it with the people that they trust, because they don't, at the end of the day, they don't know if they can trust those people to keep that a secret.
Honestly, Maria, that just makes me so, like, genuinely so sad. And again, I have to just reiterate, I understand as much as I could that there are a number of reasons for your own safety, your own security, your own existence as to why you would have to do it. But as someone, again, who is gay, I just think that it would be hard to do that and to struggle through that. If you're struggling, maybe you're not struggling, maybe you've just accepted that this is your reality. Um, and I think that kind of takes us to our spill the tea question, where that's not always the way that it is. I mean, you have a setup, an agreement for a lavender marriage, but at the same point, it might not always be what you thought it was going to be when you decided to do it in the first place. So, is it time to spill the tea and put that question out there?
Let's do it. Let's spill the tea. I'm actually really curious about this one. So yeah, let's hear it.
And just want to remind you, listening and watching, at the Spill the Tea Pod, send in those questions, send in those topics that you want us to discuss, because we plan on discussing as many of them as we humanly possibly can over time. So this is the one we have today. Hey, Will, Maria, as a man who once thought a lavender marriage would help me navigate societal pressures and expectations, how do I reconcile the tension between my true identity and the facade I've created? And how do I move forward when the weight of pretending feels too heavy?
I think we go back to that idea, right? It's so sad and heartbreaking to hear a question like that. I think this topic in and of itself is really heavy. I think the fun that people are having online of poking at, again, the idea of marrying your gay bestie, that that makes light of a very difficult situation, right? The tension is real. I would go back to actually something you said before, that idea of you're you're again kind of putting yourself back in those shoes of not coming out, right? Of that tension inside of you of presenting a certain way, but knowing who your true identity is inside and not being able to share that. So yeah, how would you feel? Because I know that you've been through that, right? You've been through that tension and that dichotomy of two basic personalities, right? Of having your inside thoughts and your outside thoughts.
I think the thing that makes me the saddest about a scenario like this one that we're talking about, or anyone going through something like this where they're not maybe even true to themselves, forget everybody else. It's all about being true to yourself first, is what I say. Is I honestly just want to go up to somebody like that and hug them because it makes me so sad, right? Like it just genuinely makes me so sad. It does sound like this person is now into this lavender marriage and trying to navigate their way through it. And there's a tunnel that is far, far, far away, and they're seeing a glimpse of light, a glimpse of hope. And they're realizing that maybe this lavender marriage wasn't for them. And they're trying to navigate the difference between what's this facade that we have created, we agreed to create it, and how can I also live life as my true authentic self. I mean, honestly, I don't necessarily know. I mean, I don't know. My thought is it's going to be hard to be able to do both and for all parties to be happy and fulfilled and satisfied in that arrangement. It's going to be very, very, very hard to navigate through that journey. And it might be a storm at times, and relationships could change. But I do think that much further on down the line, once you've gone through the therapy and you've done the things you need to do for yourself, because that's really what it's about here, I think that there could be a day where you could be happy and you could experience that self-love more than you ever have.
Yeah, I agree. That tearing of two things is just really difficult to always hold that tension, right? I do think that some people do come to a level of acceptance that this is their life and they are, let's say, content with it. Maybe they don't experience like the same level of passion or happiness that others might, but there is a level of content and acceptance that you have on it. I will say in situations like this though, while I understand and I respect the pressure you can feel from your family, your friends, your religion, your political stance, any of those things, like contextually. As far as we know, we only live one life.
Uh-huh.
So if you are going to live this life, I would always recommend, and I say this more with my heart than maybe my professional voice, live the life you want to live. People are going to judge and say things and put you down regardless of the life that you're living. Please don't waste time living a life for everybody else, especially when it comes to your actual true identity. Whether that's sexual or not, it doesn't matter, but your own true self, your own true identity, live that life fully for yourself in a healthy way, as long as it's not like an unhealthy, like toxic way of living your life and hurting anybody else or even yourself. But please don't let those pressures actually like chain you down. Those are just chains that are unnecessary, and it's painful. It's painful to see that people still feel that pressure to put on this performance for everybody else when they just have this beautiful life to live. And again, you only have one.
I mean, I completely wholeheartedly agree with every single word that you just said. And truly, with this person, taking it back to the spill the tea question, it seems like they're trying to navigate, they're trying to figure it out and try to balance it out. I don't necessarily know if you can be your full, true, authentic self as a gay man, admitting you're in a lavender marriage, and also continue the relationship the way that it has been happening. I don't think that you can. It's almost like saying, I don't know. For me, it's almost like saying I'm gay, but I'm not going to be able to admit that to myself,
Yes.
let alone anyone else, right? So I'm going to feel trapped. I'm going to feel like I'm hiding. I'm going to feel closeted, to use that old school term, right?
Yeah.
And I think that it sounds like this is someone who is trying to survive. This is someone who is trying to get a gasp of air. And I'm sure this person sees or knows other gay people and sees how they are living their lives and see that they're being authentic about it and trying to figure it out. Like, I want a taste of that. I want to, experience that. Also, there's the other stance, right? If this person isn't trying to move on from this relationship or work through that journey, and he decides to stay in that house with that woman in that relationship, it could blow up in the other way too, where
Gosh, yeah. It's
depending on, again, the agreement, depending on what they have agreed on, maybe they're in this lavender marriage and maybe there is no freedom for outside fulfillment.
Yeah, I agree. But you know
Um,
what, though? I think that person knows, right? That other person knows what the agreement is and therefore knows this other person's true identity. So having that conversation, I would say, like, if I'm going to give any advice to this person, it would be have the conversation with the person that you're in the lavender marriage with, tell them how you're feeling and explore those possibilities. And then there has to be at least one or two people in your life that you actually fully trust that would be willing to have this conversation with you and figure out this journey. But then you also brought up this idea of like other people that might be living their fullest sexuality or their fullest identity, having conversations with them and getting that community around them and trying to figure out. I think you talked about it in one of our other episodes, this idea of if the people around you don't accept you as who you are, well, maybe you're in the wrong community and you need to start making new friends, right? New people that are going to support and encourage who you actually are. And maybe this is something that this person that gave us this question needs to explore, right? Maybe we're just in the wrong community right now and we need to explore something different.
and it's also this whole concept of, because in a sense, this person would be kind of coming out if they left that marriage, right? Coming out more publicly, or at least to themselves. That's the whole concept here, is that they haven't fully accepted who they are, whether that's their internalized homophobia, which is a thing, or it's the other societal pressures, it's religion, it's background, it's family, it's friends, it's all these things. You never know, right? It could be partly that they're in their own head about this whole thing too. Um, I think that there's just no way for this person to live a fully authentic, happy life if they are truly gay and they are identifying as gay, which we're going to assume that they are, uh, without there being some progress here, along the way, because it's just too hard to fake it. You can fake it. We all have. Most gays have at some point faked it, being someone or trying to be someone who you're not. But at the end of the day, like it's going to eventually come out.
Yeah.
Pun intended. Yeah.
I'm curious though too if they maybe have an agreement of how long this is going to last, right? Not all lavender marriages are forever. Some of them
Well, that's a
are
good point.
actually within like a context of a time frame, right? So sometimes you say like for the next 5 years in order to do this, this and this, or because of these reasons, we need to do this lavender marriage and this is how it's going to work. Maybe they've been in that relationship for 2 years. Maybe he's able to have the conversation of like, hey, can we decide that we're going to separate on year 4 and for these reasons, and then I'm able to go live my life however I want to live it, right? There it doesn't always have to be forever.
It doesn't. And the thing is too, is I know sometimes, and this happens in the online world and Instagram and TikToks and people kind of having fun with it and joking around with, oh, this person is gay, even if they're not saying that they are. But I do think that there is a thing too. It's almost like, well, you as a woman, you have women's intuition. Like I believe that's a real thing. I don't know if you think that's a real thing, but I think that it can be.
For sure.
I think that too, like as someone who is gay and knowing someone who could be in a relationship, like I'm not saying I do, but if I knew someone who was in a lavender marriage, you kind of like sense around this whole sense of community. You kind of have that sense, that feeling around people who might be like you, right?
Well, I totally agree. I was actually listening to a different podcast that actually talks about the idea of more masculine and more feminine lesbians, and they were actually talking about this very thing that like masculine lesbians or lesbians that kind of are more masculine. I don't know how they kind of like say it, but they actually can identify the femmes in their life because they know
Yeah.
the feeling. They were just like, it's an energy, it's a feeling. And it's true. I'm sure you can feel the same way when you walk into a house and you feel that lavender marriage. I'm sure you can feel that same energy, right? We all are connected in that way, right?
I definitely have. No, not to say that I know that people I know or people that I've met over time are in a lavender marriage, but you've always had your thoughts on that. Um, no one really cares, what everyone else thinks, but at the same point, they care what everybody else thinks. And this is a situation that kind of proves this. And if anyone's going through that and having a struggle, much like the listener of the Spill the Tea podcast, my heart goes out to them. And I'm genuinely sad for people who, hey, you know what? If you're in a lavender marriage and it's currently working for you, who are we to random people on a podcast to place any judgment on that? But if it's like this person sending us a DM and the struggle is there, they're seeing that light far at the end of the tunnel, that's where my heart goes out to you.
I agree. I think actually that would my last sip on this would be there is absolutely zero judgment when it comes to whether or not you're in a lavender marriage. My judgment, and I'll use that word, is more so on the fact that our society and our political cultural life right now has the need for lavender marriages still. That would be my last sip. Like my heartbreaking moment and judgment is more on the fact that us as a society is still allowing people to live in fear and having to live these types of closeted lifestyles in 2025.
No, that's so well put. And I mean, it's actually hard to even, not that I'm trying to like top it, but it's hard to have like my last sip today. But I think that it is, don't do something because somebody else expects it of you or that you feel like you have to do it, even if you have to do it for the time being due to safety reasons, because that's a real thing. Like you said, live your life. You only have one life to live, and eventually find a way to see the light and be your true, authentic self, because trust me, you will feel like you're starting to live your life once you do that.
Totally agree. Yes, you do start living your life once you're actually true to yourself. I love that. Yeah. And we encourage you to live a life that is fully yours.
Sometimes you live life online, scrolling, listening and following podcasts, which is what we want you to do. So if you haven't yet, make sure you give us a review, 5-star review on Spotify, like us on YouTube as well, subscribe so that when we drop a podcast, you get that notification right to your phone, right to your socials. And that's it.
That's it for this episode of Spill the Tea. If you loved what you heard, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and follow us for more candid conversations. Got a burning question or topic you want us to cover? Slide into our DMs. We're always here to spill the tea. Follow us on socials at the Spill the Tea Pod, at Will Nash on Air, and at Sex Off the Pedestal.